Imagine you're sitting around a campfire on a crisp Australian evening, the stars twinkling overhead like scattered diamonds, and I'm about to spin you a yarn that's equal parts hilarious and heartbreaking. It's a story that sounds like it was ripped from the pages of a comedy script, but it's as real as the dust in the outback. We're talking about the Great Emu War of 1932, a bizarre chapter in history where soldiers armed with machine guns went toe-to-toe with flightless birds, and let's just say the birds had the last laugh. But why did this happen? What drove humans to declare war on wildlife? And what can we learn from this feathered fiasco? Buckle up, because we're diving deep into the introduction and the background of this wild tale, peeling back the layers to uncover the economic desperation, political maneuvering, and sheer resilience of nature that made it all possible. By the end, you might just find yourself rooting for the emus. Let's start at the beginning, shall we? Picture this. It's 1932 and the world is reeling from the Great Depression. Jobs are scarce, families are scraping by, and in the vast sun-baked wheat belt region of Western Australia, things are even tougher. This is where our story unfolds. The Great Emu War, a military operation that pitted the Australian Army against hordes of emus, those towering, flightless birds that roam the continent like living dinosaurs. Now you might be chuckling already, thinking, a war against birds? Come on, but hold that thought, because this wasn't some slapstick comedy. It was a desperate bid to save livelihoods in a time of crisis. The operation kicked off in the wheat belt, a sprawling semi-arid landscape stretching northeast and south of Perth. It's a place of endless horizons where the soil is thin and unforgiving. Rainfall comes in unpredictable bursts, and droughts can turn dreams into dust overnight. Farmers there, many of them veterans fresh from the horrors of World War I, were fighting a losing battle against nature. The emus, big, bold creatures standing up to 6 feet tall, tipping the scales at around 100 pounds and sprinting at speeds that could outpace a horse, were migrating in massive numbers, drawn like magnets to the farmland's water troughs and ripening wheat fields. We're talking about an estimated 20,000 of these birds descending on districts like Campion, Chandler and Walgoolan, turning golden crops into trampled wastelands. But why go to war? The purpose was crystal clear, yet layered with complexity. First and foremost, it was about protecting those struggling farms from utter ruin. These weren't just any farmers, they were soldier settlers, men who'd survived the trenches of Europe only to face a new enemy at home. The Great Depression had slashed wheat prices to rock bottom. Government subsidies that were promised had evaporated like morning dew, and by 1932, a quarter of these farms had been abandoned, leaving families destitute. Imagine coming home from war full of hope, only to watch your hard-earned land get devoured by birds. Heartbreaking, right? The emus weren't just eating the wheat, they were stomping through fields, breaking down fences that were meant to keep out rabbits, and letting in even more pests like dingoes. It was chaos, a real-life invasion that threatened to wipe out an entire way of life. And there was a political angle too, one that adds a dash of intrigue to the mix. Western Australia was simmering with secessionist tensions. Folks were fed up with the federal government in the east feeling neglected and overlooked. By sending in the military, the powers that be hoped to show support for these veterans, easing those grumbles and maybe even preventing a full-blown split. It was a twofold mission: fix the immediate economic pain and score some political points. But as we'll see, good intentions don't always lead to glory. The scope of this so-called war was surprisingly modest. A small team of artillery personnel deployed for about 5 weeks, armed with machine guns and thousands of rounds of ammo. No massive battles, no epic sieges, just a handful of men chasing birds across the scrubland. Yet its significance? Oh, that's where it gets profound. This wasn't about winning a traditional victory. There were no medals for conquest here. Instead, it laid bare some ugly truths about human hubris. It exposed the flaws in the veteran resettlement schemes, programs that sounded noble on paper but dumped inexperienced soldiers onto marginal land without proper support. It highlighted the futility of using brute force against wildlife, showing how nature's adaptability can make even the mightiest efforts look foolish. And in a twist of irony, what started as a cull ended up shifting public opinion toward conservation. People began to see emus not as vermin but as resilient survivors. This led to changes like bounty systems where farmers got paid for each emu they dealt with and better protective fencing. But more than that, it sparked a cultural legacy of satire with cartoons, jokes, and stories that poke fun at the whole affair, reminding us that sometimes laughing at our failures is the best way to learn from them. Now, think about it. Have you ever tried to control something wild in your own life only to have it slip through your fingers? Maybe a garden overrun by weeds or a project at work that spirals out of control despite your best plans. That's the essence here, the broader theme of human-wildlife conflict, where we clash with nature's unyielding spirit. The emus didn't just survive, they triumphed, forcing us to rethink our place in the ecosystem. And as we move into the background, you'll see how this absurdity was born from a perfect storm of history, hardship, and human error. What if I told you that the seeds of this war were planted years earlier in the muddy trenches of World War I? Let's peel back those layers and find out. Transitioning smoothly into Chapter 1, we uncover the background, causes, and the key players who turned this environmental headache into a national spectacle. It all traces back to the end of the Great War in 1918. Australia, like many nations, wanted to honour its returning heroes, so the government rolled out the Soldier Settlement Scheme, a grand plan to give veterans land grants as a thank you for their service. Over 5,000 plots were handed out in the Wheat Belt, that harsh, unforgiving region we mentioned, but here's the catch. Many of these men weren't farmers by trade, they'd been clerks, labourers, or city folk before the war, thrust into agriculture without the know-how. The land itself was a gamble. Poor soils that drained nutrients quickly, rainfall that teased with abundance one year and starved the next, and droughts that could last for months, turning fertile fields into cracked earth. It's like giving someone a puzzle with half the pieces missing and expecting a masterpiece. Relatable, isn't it? Think of starting a new job in a field you're clueless about, with the boss promising tools that never arrive. Frustration builds, and soon failure feels inevitable. By the late 1920s, things were bad, but the Great Depression in 1929 turned bad into catastrophic. Wheat prices crashed. Imagine selling your harvest for pennies on the dollar, barely covering costs. Government subsidies, those lifelines that were supposed to bridge the gap, were cut or delayed. Families watched their dreams crumble. 1 in 4 farms was abandoned by 1932, leaving ghost towns of empty homesteads and broken spirits. The emotional toll, immense. These were men who'd faced death overseas, now battling despair at home. Wives and children went hungry, debts piled up, and hope faded like the setting sun. Then came the tipping point. A brutal drought in 1932 pushed the emus into action. Normally, these birds breed in the arid inland, but with water scarce, they migrated en masse toward the coast. Straight into the farmlands, about 20,000 strong, they flocked to the water supplies meant for livestock and the lush, ripening crops. Emus aren't delicate creatures. They're built like athletes, long legs for speed, bursts up to 55 miles per hour, powerful bodies that can knock down barriers. They didn't just nibble, they feasted, devouring wheat stalks whole, trampling whatever was left underfoot. And those rabbit-proof fences, the ones built at great expense to keep out smaller pests, emus barreled through them like they were tissue paper, creating gaps that let rabbits and dingoes pour in, multiplying the destruction. It was a domino effect of disaster, one bird's rampage leading to an ecosystem-wide meltdown. The farmers, pushed to their breaking point, didn't take this lying down. These were battle-hardened vets, remember? They'd wielded machine guns in the trenches, so why not here? They petitioned the federal government, demanding action. Emus had been classified as vermin since 1922, when legal protections were stripped away to allow culling. The settlers saw this as a straightforward fix: treat the birds like the enemy and eliminate them. But there was more at play. Politics, always politics. Helping these farmers could shore up support for veterans nationwide and cool the secessionist fever in Western Australia, where locals felt like second-class citizens compared to the eastern states. What better way to show solidarity than sending in the troops? Enter Sir George Pearce, the Minister of Defence under Prime Minister Joseph Lyons. Pearce, a pragmatic politician with a no-nonsense demeanour, greenlit the operation without even looping in the military board in Canberra. He saw it as a win-win, a chance for some light troop training, good publicity for the government, and a quick solution to a serious agricultural threat, as he later defended in Parliament. But his rush drew fire. Senator James Dunn mockingly dubbed him the Minister of the Emu War, a nickname that stuck like glue and turned Pearce into a punchline. Can you imagine the parliamentary debates? Laughter echoing through the halls as serious men poked fun at a bird war. It adds that human touch, doesn't it? The way ego and haste can backfire spectacularly. On the front lines, the man in charge was Major Gwynedd Purves Wyn Aubrey Meredith, a seasoned officer from the Royal Australian Artillery's 7th Heavy Battery. Meredith was no rookie. He'd seen action before, but nothing like this. He commanded a tiny squad, Sergeant S. McMurray and Gunner J. O'Halloran, equipped with 2 Lewis machine guns and a whopping 10,000 rounds of ammo. Meredith's reports after the fact are gold, vivid, almost poetic in their frustration. He likened the emus to tanks for their bullet-absorbing toughness, or Zulus for their swift, evasive maneuvers. If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, he wrote, it would face any army in the world. They can face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. Picture that. Soldiers firing away, only for the birds to shake it off and bolt. Suspenseful, right? You wonder, how many hits can one emu take before it drops? Other key figures added colour to the chaos. Western Australian Premier James Mitchell was a fierce advocate, funding logistics and pushing for the operation to resume after a brief halt. In Parliament, MP Rowley James brought the humour, sarcastically asking if medals would be awarded to the soldiers or perhaps to the emus themselves for their bravery. Then there were the critics. Ornithologists like Dominic Saventi and Hubert Whittell, who decried the mass destruction as inhumane. They marvelled at the emu's guerrilla tactics and how flocks would split into small groups, posting lookouts to spot danger early. Even UK conservation groups chimed in, protesting the slaughter and shifting sympathy toward the birds. Let's not forget the groups that made this possible. The Australian federal government planned and bankrolled the response, but ended up with egg on their face, ridiculed in the press. They eventually pivoted to bounty programs instead of bullets. The Royal Australian Artillery carried out the cull, framing it as routine wildlife management, but their minimal success dinged their reputation. Veteran farmers were the spark. They petitioned for help, provided on-site support like guiding the troops, and got some short-term relief. though long-term fixes came through better fencing. The Western Australian state government footed bills for transport, food and lodging, using the event to address local gripes and quell secession talks. Media played a starring role too. Local newspapers splashed headlines that amplified the absurdity, while Fox Movie Tone sent a cinematographer to capture footage for propaganda reels. Instead of heroic triumphs, the public saw bumbling pursuits, swinging sympathy to the plucky emus, and conservationists, their protests ignited ethical debates, paving the way for protective laws and a rethink on wildlife management. Whew, what a cast of characters and forces, huh? From desperate farmers to hasty politicians, resilient birds to outraged bird lovers. This chapter paints a vivid picture of how environmental pressures, economic despair, and political expediency collided like storm clouds over the outback. It's a reminder that history isn't just dates and facts, it's people, emotions, and unexpected twists. But what happened when the guns started firing? Did the humans stand a chance, or were the emus destined to win? We'll have to wait for the next chapter to find out, but trust me, the suspense is worth it. For now, let this sink in. In the face of nature's wild heart, even the best laid plans can scatter like feathers in the wind. Picture this, a handful of soldiers, machine guns in hand, rolling out into the dusty Australian outback, expecting a quick victory over birds. Sounds straightforward, right? Oh, how wrong they were. In this chapter, we're zeroing in on the military operation itself and the avalanche of challenges that turned what was meant to be a simple cull into a legendary tale of humiliation and humility. We'll unpack the two phases, the tactics that flopped spectacularly, and the sheer ingenuity of those feathered foes. By the end, you might wonder, could a bunch of birds really outsmart trained military men? Let's find out step by step and feel the frustration building like a storm on the horizon. Let's transport ourselves to the wheat belt in late 1932. The landscape here is no gentle farmland, it's a rugged transformation story. What was once dense woodlands, teeming with native flora and fauna, had been cleared aggressively in the post-war years to make way for wheat fields. But Mother Nature doesn't give up her secrets easily. This region is drought-prone, with soils that suck up water like a sponge, only to leave everything parched when the rains fail. Erratic weather patterns mean one year you might have bumper crops, the next cracked earth stretching for miles. And in 1932, with the Great Depression biting hard, those fields were a lifeline for the soldier settlers. Enter the emus, thousands upon thousands migrating in, drawn to the man-made water sources like dams and troughs that dotted the farms. It's almost poetic, isn't it? Humans alter the land, create oases in the desert, and unwittingly invite the wildlife to the party. But this party was about to turn into a battlefield. The operation officially kicked off on November 2nd, but hold on, there was a hiccup right from the start. October had brought unexpected rainfall, scattering the emus far and wide instead of keeping them clumped together for easy targeting. Imagine the soldiers' anticipation building only to be met with empty fields. It's like showing up to a big game and finding the opposing team has ghosted you. Finally, though, the campaign launched in the Campion district with forays into nearby Chandler and Walgoolan. Small, isolated farming hubs where the wheat swayed under the relentless sun, but now under siege. Major Meredith and his tiny team weren't alone. They had a Fox Movie Tone cinematographer tagging along, camera rolling to capture heroic footage. The idea? Use it as propaganda to show the government's muscle, quelling those secessionist whispers in Western Australia by proving Canberra cared about the West's woes. High hopes indeed, but reality had other plans. The whole shebang unfolded in two distinct phases from November 2nd right through to December 10th. We'll break it down phase by phase because Each one ramps up the absurdity and the lessons, starting with the first phase, November 2nd to 8th. This was the optimistic kickoff centered around Campion. Meredith's strategy seemed solid on paper: ambushes near dams and water points where the emus naturally gathered to quench their thirst. Think about it, in a drought-stricken land, water is king. Birds flock there like office workers to a coffee machine during break time. The team would lie in wait, guns at the ready, or mount pursuits on trucks, chasing down the flocks across the bumpy terrain. Relatable, right? It's like trying to herd cats in your backyard, but these cats are 6-foot-tall speed demons. Day 1 set the tone, and not in a good way. Spotting about 50 emus in the distance, the soldiers tried to herd them into firing range, but emus aren't dumb. They're survivors honed by the harsh outback. The flock split instantly, darting in every direction like a well-drilled evasion squad. Only a dozen or so fell to the bullets. You can almost feel the soldiers' exasperation, sweat dripping under their hats, fingers itching on triggers, only for the birds to vanish into the scrub. Then came November 4th, a moment that could have been triumphant. Over 1,000 emus converged at a dam, a massive, feathery mass ripe for the picking. The machine guns roared, and then jammed after just 12 kills. Jammed in the heat of the moment, with victory so close. The rest of the flock scattered like leaves in the wind, leaving the team staring at empty water. Suspenseful, huh? What if that gun hadn't failed? Could the war have ended right there? But the real kicker came with the truck-mounted chasers. Emus can hit 55 miles per hour in short bursts, faster than the clunky vehicles bumping over uneven ground. Aiming from a jolting truck? Forget it. It's like trying to shoot a moving target while riding a roller coaster. One pursuit ended in disaster when a bird got tangled in the truck's path, causing a crash that wrecked the vehicle. No serious injuries, but talk about adding insult to injury by the end of this phase. After blazing through about 2,500 rounds, the reported kills ranged from a measly 50 to a more optimistic 500. Historians argue over the numbers, but either way, it was a fraction of the 20,000-strong invasion. The media pounced with headlines mocking the effort. Emus win every round so far. Parliamentary debates turned into comedy hours, with politicians ribbing the Minister for the Emu War. The backlash was so fierce that on November 8th, the team pulled back, licking their wounds. Imagine the morale drop. Soldiers who'd faced human enemies now bested by birds. It's a humbling reminder that nature doesn't play by our rules. But the farmers weren't done fighting. Their crops were still under threat, families on the brink. They petitioned hard, and Premier James Mitchell threw his weight behind resuming the operation. So, on November 13th, Phase 2 began. Back to the ambushes, this time with a sharper focus on water sources. Success picked up a bit. They averaged about 100 kills a week. By December 10th, when the curtain finally fell, Meredith's official report claimed 986 confirmed kills using 9,860 rounds. That's exactly 10 bullets per bird, a suspiciously tidy number that raises eyebrows among historians. He added an estimated 2,500 more emus likely died from wounds later, but again, those figures feel inflated, perhaps to save face. There was even an order to collect 100 emu skins for making military hats. Fancy plumage for the army's headgear, but they fell short there too. It's like aiming for a grand trophy and coming home with scraps. Now let's dig deeper into why this all went so pear-shaped. The challenges weren't just bad luck, they were a masterclass in underestimation. First off, the emus themselves, tough as nails, their hides are thick, their muscles dense. They could take multiple shots and still sprint miles before collapsing. Meredith called them invulnerable like tanks. I mean, he wasn't exaggerating. Imagine firing round after round, seeing feathers fly, but the bird just keeps going. It's emotionally draining, that kind of resilience. Soldiers must have felt like they were in a nightmare where the enemy wouldn't stay down. Then there were the guerrilla tactics, as ornithologist Dominic Cerventi so brilliantly put it. Emus aren't mindless, they've got strategy. Flocks had these prominent leaders with black plumes acting as sentinels. Spot danger? One alert call and the group scatters into small units, dodging and weaving through the bush. Cerventi's quote captures it perfectly. The machine gunner's dreams of point-blank fire into serried masses of emus were soon dissipated. The emu command had evidently ordered guerrilla tactics. It's almost like the birds had a general calling the shots. Compare that to human warfare. Think of Vietnam or other asymmetric conflicts where smaller, agile forces outmaneuver heavy artillery. Here, nature was the insurgent, and the open landscapes of the wheat belt played right into their hands. Vast expanses meant emus could spot threats from afar and bolt, while the drought funneled them to water points, only for them to disperse lightning fast when attacked. Equipment failures piled on the misery. Those Lewis machine guns, reliable in trenches, jammed in the dust and heat. Trucks bogged down in rough terrain, pursuits turning into farces, and the planning woefully inadequate. No one accounted for the bird's speed, smarts, or sheer numbers. It's a relatable lesson. Ever planned a big event like a family reunion only for weather or unexpected guests to derail everything? Scale that up to military ops and you've got the MU war. The environment amplified every flaw. Drought concentrated the birds, making targets tempting, but also heightened their wariness around scarce water. If you've been with us from the start, you know we've journeyed through the desperation of those Depression-era farms, the bungled battles in the dusty wheat belt, and the sheer audacity of humans thinking they could outgun a flock of flightless birds. But what happened after the guns fell silent? Did the emus dance in victory? Did the soldiers slink away in shame? And how does a fiasco like this ripple through time, shaping everything from policy to pop culture? Hold on to your hats because this chapter is where the real magic happens. It's a tale of unintended consequences, hard-learned lessons, and the kind of enduring charm that turns defeat into delight. We'll explore the immediate fallout that left everyone scratching their heads, the long-term shifts that redefined how we handle nature, and the cultural echoes that still have us chuckling today. By the end, you might just see a bit of yourself in this story. After all, who hasn't faced a war against something unstoppable in their own life, like a never-ending pile of laundry or that one stubborn weed in the garden? Let's dive in and uncover the feathers that flew far beyond 1932. First off, let's talk about the immediate impacts, the shockwaves that hit right after the operation wrapped up on December 10th, 1932. Imagine the scene. Major Meredith and his team packing up their Lewis guns, the air still thick with the scent of gunpowder and regret, while the emus strutted off into the sunset like nothing happened. For the farmers, those battle-weary soldier settlers who'd pinned their hopes on this military miracle, the relief was fleeting at best. Sure, a few hundred emus were taken out. Official reports pegged it at 986 confirmed kills, with maybe 2,500 more succumbing to wounds later. But with an estimated 20,000 birds rampaging through the fields, it was like bailing out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. Crops continued to get devoured, fences trampled, and livelihoods teetered on the edge. These were families already battered by the Great Depression, men who'd survived the trenches of World War I, only to face this feathered onslaught at home. The emotional depth here is palpable. Think of the despair, the frustration of watching your wheat fields, your ticket to stability, get turned into bird buffets. It wasn't just economic loss, it was a blow to their sense of security, a reminder that nature doesn't care about your plans. But here's the twist. This temporary band-aid forced them to innovate, planting the seeds for better solutions down the line. Suspenseful, isn't it? What if this failure hadn't happened? Would we have learned anything at all? Shifting our gaze to the government and military, oh boy, the humiliation was swift and savage. No human casualties, thank goodness. No one got pecked to death or anything dramatic like that. But the reputational damage? Catastrophic. Picture Parliament sessions erupting in laughter with politicians like Rowley James sarcastically asking if medals should be awarded to the soldiers or maybe to the emus for their bravery. Headlines screamed of the birds' tactical superiority, turning what was meant to be a show of strength into a national joke. Sir George Pearce, the defence minister who'd greenlit the whole thing, earned that infamous nickname, Minister for the Emu War, and had to defend his decisions amid jeers. It exposed cracks in the system, hasty authorisations without proper consultation, underestimation of the challenge, and left the Royal Australian Artillery looking like amateurs. Relatable example time. Ever planned a big family gathering only for it to flop spectacularly because you didn't account for the weather or Aunt Karen's drama? That's the vibe here, but on a governmental scale. The public, meanwhile, started rooting for the underdogs, or should I say, underbirds. Sympathy swung toward the emus, especially with UK conservationists crying foul, labelling it an extermination of a rare species. This sparked heated ethical debates. Were we villains for turning guns on native wildlife? It forced people to confront the morality of human dominance over nature, adding emotional layers to what could have been dismissed as absurdity. And speaking of the emus themselves, talk about emerging as the true stars. These birds didn't just survive, they thrived. Their population barely dented. Fast forward to today, and estimates put Australia's emu numbers at a robust 600,000 to 700,000, roaming the outback with that same unyielding spirit. The war highlighted their resilience, but it also shone a light on their ecological roles. Emus aren't just crop munchers, they're vital players in the ecosystem. They disperse seeds for plants like the quandong, a native fruit that's like Australia's answer to the apricot, help and regenerate bushland in arid areas. Without them, biodiversity suffers. It's a profound reminder of interconnectedness. Disrupt one species and the whole web trembles. Have you ever stopped to think about the pests in your own backyard? That squirrel raiding your bird feeder might be spreading acorns that grow into mighty oaks. The emu war peeled back those layers, turning villains into vital allies in our eyes. Now let's smoothly transition to the aftermath, the policy pivots and practical fixes that rose from the ashes of this defeat. By 1934, when farmers begged for more military muscle, the government said, "No way, not again." Similar pleas in 1943 and 1948 got the same shutdown. Instead, they dusted off the old bounty system, which had been around since 1923, but got a turbo boost post-war. In just 6 months of 1934, a whopping 57,034 bounty claims rolled in, farmers getting paid per emu scalp, turning pest control into a side hustle. But the real game changer? Exclusion fencing. Starting in the 1930s and expanding massively, these sturdy barriers, taller, tougher versions of the rabbit-proof fences, kept emus, rabbits, and dingoes at bay. By 1950, the government had distributed 500,000 rounds of ammo to farmers for DIY culls, empowering locals rather than deploying troops. Federally, the tide turned toward protection. The 1999 Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act enshrined emus as a safeguarded species, emphasizing humane management over massacre. Its evolution in action, from brute force to balanced coexistence. Emotionally, this shift feels like redemption, a nation learning from its blunders, choosing harmony over hubris. What if every mistake in our lives led to such growth? Imagine applying that to personal feuds or work mishaps, turning wars into wiser paths. But the legacy? That's where this story truly soars, embedding itself in culture like a feather in the wind. Emus have long symbolized adaptability in Aboriginal lore. Stories passed down through generations depict them as clever survivors, embodying strength and endurance in a harsh land. Today, they're national icons, perched proudly alongside the kangaroo on Australia's coat of arms, representing forward progress. Neither can walk. Backward, you see, and gracing the 50-cent coin as a daily reminder of resilience. It's poetic, isn't it? A bird that defeated the army now adorns symbols of unity and pride. The event's absurdity has fueled endless media, documentaries dissecting the debacle, podcasts giggling over the details, and even YouTube videos like The Great Emu War of 1932 from 2025 channels, keeping the tale alive for new generations. Then there are the films, the 2023 action comedy The Emu War, which premiered at Monsterfest and landed on streaming platforms like Tubi and Prime, clocking a 4.2 out of 10 on IMDb for its lowbrow humor. Critics called it cheesy, but fans loved the over-the-top bird battles. And don't forget the in-development gem, The Great Emu War, announced in 2021 and still gearing up for filming in Australia as of 2025, starring comedy legends like John Cleese, Rob Schneider, and Jim Jeffries. This one's pitched as an anti-war satire from the emu's perspective. Imagine Cleese voicing a sassy bird general poking fun at human folly. It's set to hit screens around 2026, adding fresh satire to the mix. Recent discussions on X, that's Twitter for the old school folks, keep the flame burning, highlighting its appeal as a bizarre history gem. Just in the past year, users have been buzzing. One post from October 2025 quipped, "We are in the Great Emu War," tying it to modern chaos, while another declared, "I'm going to join the Emu War on the side of emus," complete with a meme-worthy image. A streamer even linked it to Aussie gamers, joking about refusing to lose a second emu war. Educational threads pop up too, like one detailing how the emu's guerrilla tactics led to the army's defeat, and viral videos explaining the whole fiasco. Posts note the bird's tactical genius, with one user sharing, "Australia waged war against emus and still lost," alongside a funny graphic. Even in 2025, anniversary pieces and memes flood timelines, proving this war's humour is timeless. It's like the internet's favourite underdog story, fostering a sense of shared laughter across the globe. To break it down visually, imagine a table of impacts. In the economic/agricultural column, short-term minimal relief led to long-term bounties and fencing booms. Military/political, immediate ridicule and withdrawal evolved into denied future aid and exposed flaws. Environmentally, those 986 to 3,486 emu deaths barely scratched the population, paving the way for 1999 protections and migration awareness. Culturally, Media mockery shifted to emu sympathy, birthing films, symbols, and folklore celebrating resilience. Finally, the key findings crystallize this as a cautionary tale for the ages. Hasty interventions that ignore animal behavior, doomed to fail, better to opt for sustainable fixes like fencing over firepower. It laid bare the flaws in veteran resettlement, the inequities of the Depression, and how climate-driven migrations, like that 1932 drought, amplify conflicts. Today, amid biodiversity crises and climate change, it's eerily relevant. Think of modern wildlife clashes, from elephants raiding farms in Africa to urban coyotes in cities. The war celebrates nature's pluckiness, proving even flightless birds can humble an army. Emotionally, it's uplifting, a story of humility, adaptation, and the beauty in defeat. What if we approached our own battles with that mindset? This chapter concludes our exploration, affirming the Emu War's role as a multifaceted lesson. Laugh at the absurdity, learn from the mistakes, and let nature remind us who's really in charge. Thanks for joining the ride. What's your takeaway from this feathered frenzy?